It happened on an open street, in broad daylight, with witnesses everywhere. That was the mistake. The man who struck her didn't need introduction. His family name was enough. The kind that made people cross the street, the kind that made police turn away. Men like him weren't protected by strength. They were protected by what came after. Bruce Lee stood there, silent, still. He didn't shout. He didn't fight back. He didn't demand anything. People thought he was scared. The man thought he'd won. Both were wrong. 3 weeks later, the man vanished, not arrested, not explained, just gone. Then his brother, then the ones who walked behind him, one by one. They stopped appearing. No fights, no police, no bodies, just absence. The kind that makes people stop asking questions, and those who understood power knew this wasn't retreat, this was erasure. The family that never backed down quietly left town. And Bruce Lee? He never mentioned it. Not once. Not ever. Because the most dangerous man is the one who doesn't need to prove it. And the loudest message is the one never spoken. The sound of the slap echoed across the street. People stopped, but no one turned to look, because this was a city where seeing certain things could be dangerous. The man who struck, everyone in the city knew his name, from shopkeepers to police. His family was the kind people would cross the street to avoid. On the street with him were 2 or 3 others, there always were, who walked behind him, who laughed at his jokes, who moved at his signal. And standing alone in front was Bruce Lee. No one with him, no name that carried weight in this city. This was a test, on an open street, in front of people. Let's see what you do now. But Bruce Lee did nothing, didn't raise his voice, didn't raise his hand, just stood there in silence. People thought, he's scared. That man thought, I've won. But both were wrong, because silence doesn't always mean defeat. Sometimes silence is a decision. Within a week, that man stopped appearing on the street. Then those with him, then his brother. No fight happened, no police came, just they vanished. And the city understood. Some people fight with noise, and some people finish things in silence. Later, people would try to soften what they saw. They would say the man had been drinking, that he misread the situation, that it was just impulse. Those explanations were comforting, because they suggested chaos, and chaos feels survivable. But those who understood how such men operated knew better. The slap was not emotional, it was calculated. It carried no follow-through because none was needed. The message was delivered the moment the hand made contact. Everything after was supposed to be automatic. Fear, noise, submission, or escalation that would justify retaliation later, on better terms. This was how public dominance worked in that world. Not through rage, through precision. You didn't strike hard. You struck clearly. The target that day was not chosen randomly. A man who arrived quietly, with only his wife beside him. No visible allies, no immediate backup. A clean opportunity to assert hierarchy without risk. What made it worse, what made it deliberate, was that it was done to her. That detail mattered. In the unspoken codes of those circles, striking a woman was never about strength. It was about humiliation by proxy. You prove control over the man by showing he cannot protect what stands beside him. It's not meant to provoke a fight. It's meant to end one before it begins. And everyone on that street understood that. This was why no one shouted, why no one stepped forward, why no one pulled out phones or called for help. Interference would mean choosing a side, and sides came with consequences. The man who delivered the slap didn't look triumphant afterward. He looked expectant. He waited for the reaction that would validate his position. A raised voice would have been enough. A step forward would have been enough. Even a hand on his chest would have sufficed. Anything that let the situation move into familiar territory. Instead, he was met with something rarer. Absence, not avoidance, not confusion. Absence of engagement altogether. The moment didn't stretch because Bruce Lee hesitated. It stretched because the expected response never arrived. The structure the man relied on, action followed by reaction, collapsed inward. For the first time, the slap existed without context. That was dangerous. Because without reaction, an act loses its meaning, and when an act loses meaning in public, it cannot establish hierarchy. It only exposes intent. People began to feel uneasy, though few could explain why. The man had struck someone and remained standing, unchallenged. By all visible measures, he had won. Yet the street did not settle. There was no release, no laughter, no restoration of order. The man sensed it too. His posture shifted slightly. He glanced once toward the distance, not because he feared immediate reprisal, but because he felt something had gone unfinished. The slap was supposed to close a chapter. Instead, it opened one. And somewhere beneath the surface, calculations began to change. Those who heard the story later assumed the hardest part was restraint. They were wrong. Restraint is visible. It can be mistaken for fear, discipline, or weakness, depending on who's watching. What Bruce Lee practiced in that moment was something quieter, something more unsettling. He ended the interaction without participating in it. He didn't look back at the man. He didn't speak to the crowd. He didn't demand acknowledgement. He simply removed himself and his wife from the situation, as if it had already concluded. This violated an expectation deeper than pride. In that world, dominance required completion. An act demanded response so it could be measured. When someone refused to respond, they didn't lose automatically. But they didn't fit anywhere on the hierarchy either. And what cannot be placed becomes unpredictable. Those close enough noticed something subtle as they passed. Bruce Lee's pace didn't change. His posture didn't tighten. There was no delayed surge of emotion waiting for privacy. He didn't console his wife loudly or whisper reassurances meant to be overheard. They left as they had arrived. This wasn't composure for the audience. It was internal closure. The man who struck remained behind, surrounded by people who now avoided his eyes, not out of fear, but because something had gone wrong. He had asserted himself publicly and received nothing in return. No submission, no resistance, no confirmation of status, only silence. That silence followed him. In the days after, he mentioned the incident casually to people who mattered, framed it as nothing, a moment handled. He laughed when he told it. Laughter was supposed to seal it, but questions began to surface, not from outsiders, from within. Why didn't he react? Why didn't he respond later? Why didn't anything happen? In families like his, unanswered questions carried weight. Silence could be misread as patience, and patience, when combined with reputation, suggested preparation. Bruce Lee didn't call anyone. He didn't send intermediaries. He didn't spread the story. That absence of control forced others to fill the gap. Speculation grew precisely because there was no signal to anchor it. Some assumed he was afraid. Others suspected something worse, that he was unconcerned. And unconcerned men were the most dangerous kind. What no one realized yet was that the decision had already been made, not emotionally, not strategically, but philosophically. Bruce Lee had no interest in winning the moment. The moment had already passed. What remained was balance, and balance wasn't restored through reaction. It was restored through placement. The man had acted publicly. What followed would not. And that, more than anything, unsettled those who understood how power normally announced itself. It did not come immediately. That was the first detail people misunderstood. They assumed the response, whatever it was, must have been swift. A delay, they believed, would weaken its effect. But delay was the effect. Nothing happened for days, then weeks. No visit, no phone call, no pressure applied through mutual contacts. The absence stretched just long enough for the man, and more importantly, his family, to begin interpreting it on their own. In families built on consequence, time is never empty. When Bruce Lee finally acted, it was not in a way that could be intercepted. He did not reach downward. He reached around. What was sent was not addressed to the man who struck first. He had already proven himself irrelevant. The message was routed where decisions were actually made, through someone who understood both worlds well enough to know when not to embellish. Those who later claimed to know the contents disagreed on specifics. Some said it was written. Others said it was spoken. A few insisted it was only a question, passed along quietly. But they all agreed on what it was not. It was not a threat. It did not describe retaliation. It did not ask for compensation or apology. It acknowledged the incident without dramatizing it. It stated what had occurred, where it had occurred, who had been present, nothing more. Then it did something unexpected. It made clear that no response was required. This was the point that traveled. In families accustomed to managing risk, the most alarming message is not one that promises action. It is one that removes negotiation. By declining resolution, Bruce Lee placed the burden of interpretation entirely on them. Was this restraint? Was this confidence? Was this dismissal? They could not be sure. And uncertainty, when status is at stake, becomes corrosive. The message did not circulate widely. It didn't need to. It moved upward, then inward. Quiet discussions followed behind closed doors. Not arguments, calculations. Men older than the one who struck weighed cost against benefit, visibility against permanence. Bruce Lee was not a street opponent. He did not operate inside their ecosystem. There were no leverage points to apply pressure quietly. Any move against him risked exposure without guarantee of closure. And worse, the incident had already happened in public. Public mistakes required private correction. The question was not whether the slap had been justified. The question was whether continuing the matter served their interests. The answer, reached without consensus but with clarity, was no. No one contacted Bruce Lee afterward. No attempt was made to smooth things over. No explanation was offered. The decision manifested differently. The man who struck was instructed to step back, at first temporarily, then indefinitely, not as punishment, but as containment. Because the danger was no longer the man he had struck. It was the silence that followed him. And in that silence, authority had shifted, without spectacle, without announcement, without anyone needing to say a word. The change was not announced. It never is. People simply began to notice. Patterns break. The man who once occupied the same corner was no longer there. His name stopped coming up in conversations that mattered. Invitations went unanswered. Messages acknowledged, but never returned. At first, it was described as a cooling-off period. Then it became something else. Those who knew how families managed liability understood what was happening. This was not discipline meant to correct behavior. It was distance designed to dissolve association. The man hadn't embarrassed the family through excess. He had embarrassed them through miscalculation. He had acted publicly against someone who didn't play by their rules, and worse, had refused to play at all. That refusal forced a decision higher up. Older members looked at the incident without emotion. They didn't debate right or wrong. They assessed exposure. A public altercation involving a recognizable figure created attention they didn't control. Any further action would magnify that attention without guaranteeing resolution. They chose retreat, not surrender, not apology, withdrawal. The man was advised to leave the city, not formally, not in writing. Suggestions were made, alternatives offered. He accepted them quickly, sensing the shift before it was fully explained. His brothers followed, one by one. Some left for business reasons, others simply stopped appearing. The network that had once made him untouchable thinned quietly, intentionally. No one confronted Bruce Lee. No one challenged him later in private. That absence was the clearest signal of all. In the months that followed, the incident was not referenced directly, but it reshaped interactions in subtle ways. People who might have tested boundaries thought twice. Those who traded in intimidation recalibrated their sense of scale. Bruce Lee continued his work unchanged. He didn't speak about the matter publicly. He didn't allow it to harden his demeanor or soften his presence. To most, nothing appeared different. But those who understood power dynamics recognized the outcome. A family known for never backing down had chosen to disengage, without spectacle. Not because they were defeated, but because escalation offered them nothing. That decision traveled. It didn't become a warning story. It became a reference point, and reference points last longer than confrontations. What lingered was not fear, but clarity, a quiet understanding that some forms of authority could not be provoked, could not be cornered, and did not need to announce themselves. The situation closed without ceremony, but its effects continued to unfold long after the street where it began had returned to being just another place. People passed through. Only now they passed through differently, watching, calculating, remembering. That silence didn't fade. It became permanent, and in certain circles, permanent silence is the loudest message of all. With time, the story simplified itself. Details were lost, names blurred, locations shifted depending on who told it and when. Some versions grew quieter, others grew sharper, but the ending never changed. The family did not return. Years passed. New faces replaced old ones. Businesses changed hands. The city adjusted, as cities always do. Yet, among those who paid attention to patterns rather than headlines, the absence remained noticeable. The man who struck first was rarely mentioned. When he was, it was without emphasis. He became a footnote in conversations about judgment, timing, and restraint. Not condemned, not defended, simply referenced as someone who misread a situation, and paid for it in ways that could not be reversed. Bruce Lee never corrected the story. He did not preserve it. He did not deny it. He did not use it to reinforce his image. When asked years later about conflict, he spoke instead about economy of movement, about resolving imbalance with the least necessary force. He never cited the incident. He didn't need to. Those who understood recognized the consistency. The lesson was never about dominance. It was about placement, about knowing when engagement strengthens a situation and when it contaminates it, about understanding that the most decisive responses often occur outside the moment that provokes them. What made the story endure was not the slap. It was the restraint that followed, the patience, the precision. Nothing was taken publicly. Nothing was demanded privately. And yet, the outcome reshaped behavior more effectively than violence ever could. In later years, when Bruce Lee's influence expanded far beyond that city, the story followed quietly behind him, not as a boast, but as confirmation, proof that his philosophy didn't begin on training floors or film sets, but in lived decisions made under pressure. Those who told the story did so carefully. They didn't raise their voices, they didn't dramatize the moment, they left space at the end, because the power of the incident was not in what happened, but in what didn't. No retaliation, no spectacle, no need to prove anything again, just a correction made so cleanly that years later it still held. And when the story ended, people usually sat with it a moment longer than necessary, not impressed, not inspired, just aware that power doesn't always announce itself, that strength doesn't always show, that the most dangerous responses are the ones you never see coming until they've already happened, and by then it's far too late to do anything but disappear